Welcome back, everyone. It's great to have you all back. I hope you had a good lunch. And because the second panel has expressed a desire to self-moderate, I'll hand over to the panel. Enjoy.
You make that sound so rebellious, which I love and I'm going to embrace.
Maybe we'll start by introducing ourselves, and maybe self-moderation could also, I will introduce myself, could also mean that this is a very open session. I think it would be lovely to have questions from you or to hear from different experiences. Okay, I'm Sam Lackey. I'm the director of Liverpool Biennial of Contemporary Art. I've been there almost 4 years. Amazing. But biennial time is different from other time. And maybe we could talk about time and biennials as well. Would be interesting. And actually, I wrote to Christian and said I'd really like to hear from other people about how different biennials are working around ideas of inclusion and diversity and what that means for them. Because what I really treasure with this International Biennial Association is it's the opportunity to hear about different kinds of practices from different areas of the world. So for me, it's that chance, really. I didn't want to be here telling you what we're doing so much as hearing what everybody else is thinking and doing. So thank you, Christian, for inviting me. Thank you to my panelists for being involved in this discussion too. And thank you all, I think, for being open. So far today, we've had great talks and we've talked about some of the ideas that I think we will also connect with. But what I'm after, I'm going to be completely transparent. I want to know what you are all doing as well, right? So should we go on with introductions? And then I think we'll each say a little thing. So I'm going to hand you over. We're going to go one to the other to the other. So to Kate.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, I'm Kate Brehme, and for those of you who don't know me, I am an independent curator, disabled independent curator, based in Berlin, but working very much internationally, working with disabled and non-disabled artists. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later and why that's important to mention. My history with the IBA goes back about 10 years, actually, when I first met quite a few people here, so very nice to see you all again. I began a PhD exploring biennials about 10 years ago, and I visited the IBA meeting symposia as a researcher, and I'm really honoured to be back and feel very privileged to be able to sit here as a guest this time, not a little student in the audience scribbling notes, but as a guest speaker. And it's a fantastic opportunity to give something back to a community of biennial curators and directors and other staff members who have been so generous with their time with me. So thank you for making my PhD possible. I'm going to leave that there. Yes. Thank you. And I'll hand over to Alexia.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I'm a curator. I'm conservateur de musée for a very long time. Maybe I will talk about that later, because the museum I come from is very much about inclusivity and hospitality. So maybe I will start about this subject. I'm now director of the Fine Art Schools in Paris. And actually, until the end of the year, beginning of the next one, curator of this Biennial. I've been very, very happy to work with this very great team. It was such a dream. That's what I said yesterday, but it was a dream to work with Isabelle, with Sabine, with Fanny here, and all the production team in these very beautiful and inspiring places. So yeah, I will talk about how we've been working with the artists about inclusivity, hospitality, and being all together, which is the main subject, the main topic of this biennial.
Okay, I'm going to start then. I think hospitality is a lovely place to start because we have such a range of biennales here. We have biennales who are 50 years old, and we have biennales who are just like ideas starting. And I wanted to start with perhaps we have maybe some points of common ground, and hospitality and artists and thinking about including people in different ways, I think is maybe common ground. As I am sat here waiting for this talk, I was offered a Portuguese tart, I was offered a satsuma, and I was offered an apple. So this is by way of saying that I believe that biennials and biennial people are fundamentally hospitable, right? One of the ways they work is to bring people together, to support them, to connect them, that there is something intrinsic in what we all do in very different contexts that connects us. So that's one place I wanted to start. Secondly, on my way here, I read this book because I loved the title. And I wanted to mention it because I also wanted to introduce the idea of imperfection as we talk about these issues. This idea that we start from positions where we acknowledge that we are imperfect in how we operate. And for me, it's a useful way of thinking through our practice as a biennial and how we work with artists, how we work with communities, audiences, everybody we come into contact with. So I'd like, if my convenience will agree, to hold that. And then thirdly, I just wanted to read to you a very small paragraph that I wrote directly after my first biennial. And now I've read it a couple of times. I wrote it, my first biennial was in a pandemic. Okay, what a way to start. So I started the job as director 16 weeks before the biennial was due to open. Okay, which meant that it had its own momentum. It was beautiful, you know, it had been developed and worked on, but the team were crazy and exhausted, and it was in a pandemic. And here, hold on, you have to bear with me. And now I read this thing that I wrote 3 years ago, and I can also sense my hysteria slightly. And what I wrote is that our long-term vision, I was quick in thinking we needed to be more long-term, was to move towards inclusive practices that support, and this is for a funding application, so the language, you can hear this too, but maybe, so I'm going to go straight to the hysterical, slightly hysterical parts. So, but written in funding application language. So what I write is, the high intensity activity of working towards a single festival moment structurally embeds exclusionary practices. It's there. It relies on neurotypical engagement from everyone involved and physical and mental tolerance of extreme and intense working methods. Alongside this is a biennial practice that's implicated in tourism, in regeneration, in those economies, and that meant, particularly for Liverpool, was that we were seeking out disused, unused spaces, which were amazing, an amazing way to think about the city, but many of them were really difficult, just physically difficult to negotiate. So my starting point was like, we're screwed. And this was a way of starting to think about this, and it came from the team I was working with, and from that moment of the pandemic that we've already spoken about today, is that maybe we have an opportunity to change here, now. Like maybe there is something here. And so that's what we started working towards, and I can talk a little bit more about things that we have tried to do, things we have failed at, things we have done well later, but right now maybe to hand over to you, Kate, having given you the context of like the difficulty of this kind of structure that we work within. Is that okay?
Yeah. Whew. I'm just going to digest for a few minutes while I start to talk. Hopefully it will come out and make sense. So maybe I can start by introducing myself a little bit more and my positionality, because I think that's crucial to distinguish myself as a non-biennial person. However, I say that, with the knowledge that I'm a biennial researcher, or was a biennial researcher, that I'm a biennial public, I'm a curator who operates within these international art circles as well. And as someone who, let's put it really bluntly, am on the receiving end of that exclusion on a daily basis, and have been throughout my career. And so I'm going to speak to that experience, and I'm going to bring that experience and hopefully form a response to what you said, and also to invite people to share their experiences as well. And I think my goal, I have 2 points that I want to raise. I'll get to them in a minute, but I guess my goal is similar to yours in that I'm interested in breaking open that spatio-temporal model that is the biennial, and exploring the capacity that has for inclusion. Rather than, what I see is this kind of often sort of default mode when we talk about inclusion in whatever context or circles is this, we're not doing enough. We're doing it wrong, we're not doing enough, we're not meeting enough people's needs. And I want to try and flip that and look at it from a really positive perspective, and look at how access can actually be a catalyst for change, how access can be a catalyst for creativity, and try and sort of offer that, I guess, as a point of conversation. So anyway, that's the goal. I mentioned before that I'm disabled. I mentioned that for me this is really important to make visible. I have an invisible disability, so you can't see it. It's a chronic illness. It's been with me my whole life. I came out as disabled about 10 years ago, basically after burning out, working as a curator, an independent curator whose needs were not being met in my profession. And this is a lifelong journey. It's full of ups and downs, and I don't have all the answers at all. But for me to introduce myself as a disabled curator at an International Biennial Association event is actually an incredibly political statement to make. It's an incredibly political statement to make because I don't see very many other disabled curators at events like this. And I really, really want that to change. The interesting thing is that disabled people make up the world's largest minority. And if you think about disability in an expanded way, if we think about it far beyond medical diagnoses, if we think about it that encompasses all the people who are affected by COVID, for example, if we think about people with mental illness, and we all know that the rates of that are going up exponentially around the world. If we think about disability in a broader way, and we acknowledge the reality that as human beings we will all be affected by disability at one point or another in our lifetimes, it is a part of our everyday life. Why it is not a larger part of public discourse is a scandal. This is something that we should be discussing alongside sustainability in an ecological sense. This is something we should be discussing alongside conflict and war. This is something that should be on the agenda all the time. Disabled people have histories. We have our own cultures. We have... Everything okay? We have vibrant arts practices in the visual arts, in performing arts. We are an international hub of people, but it's not recognised, it's denied, it's oppressed. And this needs to change. The access that we provide for people with disabilities is something that is of benefit to everybody. Now, obviously I'm talking from my own very personal and professional experience of disability. So there's two things that I want to argue for today, and the first is that disability needs to be part of that larger banner of diversity. Often we see conversations around diversity acknowledging queer people's rights, people of colour, people in exile. We look at diversity in terms of migration. It's very, very rare in contemporary art context that we examine it in terms of disability, despite the fact that we are the world's largest minority. Disabled people have intersectional identities. They are everywhere, in all parts of society, at all age levels. We are women, we are queer, we are people of colour, we are parents, we are professionals, we are artists, but we're not always immediately visible, either due to the nature of our medical condition or because we are segregated from mainstream society due to societal barriers. And here I want to actually acknowledge a lot of the work that has been done by disability arts activists over the years. I want to point out a term that I find incredibly helpful for looking at this form of discrimination and how it is intersectional. A group by the name of Sins Invalid, who some of you might know from the States, have spent many, many years creating various different archives of knowledge that they share. They are largely comprised of disabled people of colour. Talila El Lewis is somebody who writes a lot about ableism and talks about the way in which people are discriminated, people with disabilities who are discriminated. Ableism is not just something that is localised to people with disabilities. It's an experience that is shared with other people who are discriminated against on the grounds that their body is different. So this is something that needs to be spoken about a lot more in artistic circles, in institutions. And we need to acknowledge that intersectionality and how it plays out. So I talked a bit about access as something that's beneficial not just for people with disabilities. We need to explore allyship and how that works, how we can be allies to those who have less power, less voice, less position. My second point is that this is hard work, there's no doubt about it. Access costs money, and therefore we need to think about it in a sustainable way. And we need to see access as not just an add-on to one-off projects, but as a sustainable and integral part of ongoing biennial production, something that extends beyond the typical 2-year cycle. So how can we build on existing local and international infrastructures, networks and communities to ensure access to biennials not just for audiences, but for artists, curators, and most importantly, biennial staff, people who actually produce the biennial. If you don't have the resources that you need to do your job properly, how on earth are you supposed to care for your artists and your communities? How do we see the creative potential of access? How do we embrace the aesthetics of access and embed it into our curatorial methodologies? And I can come back to that a bit later, maybe when we can talk about imperfection. I'm going to leave it there for now and pass over to Alexia. Thank you.
Yes, imperfection, infinity, doubts, that's very interesting words. Just telling you about where I come from, about the Macval, which I spent nearly all my life there, which now is a museum beside Paris, in the suburbs, in very working class territory, and you know how France is centralized. So out of Paris, no way, even if it's only 3 kilometers. And this museum was dedicated to its audience, to this very popular class population coming from different waves of migrations. And all the topic was about dedicate this museum to its to this population and working on including this population to first to the team itself, as they became, you know, kind of ambassadors of the museum. Also with different kind of residencies programs like we did here, inviting artists coming from other countries to give their sites, to give the experience, to mix their artistic experience with the history of this territory, and also to try to share the process of creation with the people around. But just to say that you were talking about the different teams, it's never finished. You always have the feeling that you gain something, you win something, but you have to restart the day after. It's never finished, it's never achieved. Always to do it again. And that's why I was very happy to be invited here, because I had done already one biennale with Claude Bélanger in Quebec some years ago, and it was a very beautiful experience in Quebec City about inclusion too, about working with the territory, and the territory I had to discover, and I've loved so much. And here it's a very happy experience, because this territory gives a lot for a very long time to the artist, thanks to the 2 biennials of dance and contemporary art for, I don't know, more than 30 years now. So it's more comfortable, of course, to work here than in other places. So when Isabelle invited me, we have decided to work about this subject, about relationships, welcoming, how to be stronger together, what makes a relationship possible and what makes it impossible to, of course, so both sides. So that's why we decided to, 2 years ago now nearly, to work in a quite long process and to work first with the territory. And here it's a huge territory, because this is a huge region that goes from Provence in the south to the Alps, the mountains in the northeast. It's a huge territory, and we felt really we need to create this movement from the further to Lyon, until Lyon. So we decided to have, before there was 2 programs, one in and one off. And we decided to have only one process, a long-term process from the further to the center. That's why we invited many artists to work on different kind of territories, with different kind of communities, with different kind of techniques, of projects. And so we started more than 1 year ago. And the works now are here, or sometimes still on the territories, but they came from the further to join Lyon. To me, a biennale is a welcoming project. First, welcoming the artist, and for sure, coming now from an art school, the subject of recognizing how we recognize artists in the society, is a main subject. In France, artists don't have still a real statute. They don't have a real value except to the art market. So this is, to me, a real subject. So how we recognize artists, how we welcome artists, and how we welcome, of course, audience, and how we try to create the different conditions of the encounters. So encounter is the real subject of the Biennial. So we invited the artists with a very large, very open issue, subject, maybe too much, but it was to let them give their own interpretation of the subjects. Relationship, welcoming the other, different sides, and of course it's about a relationship to ourselves, to the others, also to our environment, also to our history, of the other's history, which is also a real subject today in France. Who is able, who has a right to talk about the others, or for the others, I don't know. And yeah, it was very open, and to me this is a real condition to a welcoming and an inclusive project. It's to accept each vision, each voice. That's why we called it the river's voices. And we have the plural everywhere, not the singular, the plural everywhere. So we invited the artists to come here, and that's why we've been working almost with artists coming from all around, even if they come from different parts of the world, which is the reality. But most of the artists are our neighbors, have chosen France or to study or to refugee, or whatever, I don't know. Some come from further also, but most of them are our neighbors. And the thing is, we don't know them, so it was to discover people, artists living all around us. And each of them has chosen the place they wanted to create, to work in, to create a kind of dialogue, of conversation with each of the three main places. Les Grands Locaux you saw yesterday here, and the museum you will discover tomorrow. So yeah, it's about the different conditions of inclusion, of welcoming the different voices, welcoming also different points of view and different ages. There are all the artists we have invited, we wanted to have a kind of representation of the long life of artists. So that's why we have different generations, but most of the artists are very young. So it was also to give them a chance to be known, to give them a chance to meet audience. And what I've been discovering, because we didn't decide so much before, so it's a kind of conversation, but the project appears each day a little bit more. So now I can talk about it. I couldn't before. And we can notice that most of the artists in the Grands Locaux have proposed inclusive works. Works like shelters, works to be all together, to play music, to watch together, to talk together about around a table, to feel something about humanity and our history. I'm thinking about Oliver Beer. So most of the works talk about that. So why? Maybe to create a dialogue, to make a kind of echo to this huge place that Les Grands Locaux are, but also, I think, to realize the conditions of being together, to fight, to know each other, I don't know, but to be all together. Voilà. I don't know if I can say anything else. I thought I was supposed to talk about sustainability later, so I'm sorry. I didn't prepare so much. So I had to make my mind as listening to you.
I mean, I think it all intersects actually quite beautifully. Sustainability is an incredibly...
The next panel.
Yeah, but I mean, people with disabilities are actually often some of the hardest hit when we look at, a lot of the major crises that are happening around the world at the moment and have been happening over the last 10 years and seem to be accelerating. And my question is always, okay, if the Biennial is a host and if it's, one of its major roles is to welcome and to facilitate encounters with different people, then how do you set up the right conditions for those encounters to be inclusive and accessible? How do you actually create working environments where people feel welcome to say, actually, I don't feel welcome. Actually, I feel oppressed. Actually, I don't want to be included. So a big question for me is always, who's doing the including? Who's sitting at the table making the decisions about the working conditions under which we're all part of and supposed to work to? Maybe to bring it around to imperfection, the working conditions that I'm talking about are very much, at least in a biennial context, not just a biennial context, I think many contexts within contemporary art production are dominated by patriarchal, capitalist, standardized practices. And these are the very things that deny imperfection. They deny different bodies. They deny different ways of working that actually make your body feel safe and comfortable and allow it to be productive and creative.
Okay. I think I can talk a little bit about practices that we might undertake at Liverpool Biennial to try and shift those structures within which we're working. But I guess the thing that I'm going to say now before I forget is that I would love you both to talk about the productivity or the positivity of bringing difference together within the biennial context. So you talked a little bit about this lifetime of an artist, which is very clear in the biennial. So these very young artists with these artists who have a different range of experience. And I think maybe there's something for us to think about a little bit there. And Kate, I'm interested in what happens when we bring together or bring in artists who might identify as disabled with other artists, and kind of the productivity of inclusion that isn't about othering, but that's about accepting difference. So that's something I'm kind of interested in. In terms of very practically talking about the biennial and how we try to shift our ways of operating, we have some really simple things we have implemented with support. We have a person on the team who we employ to do this work, not as a hospitality or artist liaison. That's not their job. Their job is access liaison. So to speak to each artist, to each venue, to think about audiences, to think about everything we do in terms of creating a work environment that tries not to exclude. And that could be from how we talk about our financial spreadsheets to asking an artist if they're a parent, and that makes a difference about when they want us to contact them. And we do that through contracting. So sending out a kind of rider before they start with us, where we ask for all that information. We don't do that for the team yet, though, interestingly. So that's sort of a kind of very practical thing we did. And in terms of money's important. We made a decision simply to allocate 5% of our overall budget to supporting access in what we do. It's complicated, but I guess I would love to hear from both of you about kind of the generative possibilities of bringing together difference within exhibition formats, maybe even, or biennial formats, and what that might mean differently for either of you.
Maybe I can go first. What immediately springs to my mind is a very recent project that my colleagues and I at Berlin Inclusion worked on. So I'm co-founder of a a small organization based in Berlin that provide consultancy services to arts organizations, but we also curate our own projects. We're a mixture of curators and arts mediators and artists. We're disabled-led, so the majority of the people running the show have disabilities. We have an extensive network of people with disabilities and their allies throughout Germany and also in other places too. And in, oh gosh, when was it? 2022, we staged an exhibition that was a culminative show showing the work of 6 artists that we had hosted in residence. We received funding from the Special Olympics, which was hosted in Germany that year, which says a lot about the state of general arts funding in Germany for accessible and inclusive arts projects. I'm just going to park that there. That's a whole other conversation. We basically staged Germany's first accessible residency program for artists with and without disabilities in the visual arts. This had not happened before. The performing arts sector is a different story. There are a lot of residencies and possibilities for artists with disabilities there, but just definitely in the visual arts, not. So we ran a 6-month residency program. We're a spaceless organisation, so we have to work in partnership with the Berlin art scene. And we partnered with organisations like HKW, Bauhaus Archiv, Berlinische Galerie, and created accessible working spaces for the artists to come together. It was organised in a hybrid format so that people could attend as per requirements of their bodies. So if they couldn't actually get to the space physically, they could still participate. We had a very juicy access budget that made a big difference. It meant that we could, for example, communicate in a very natural way with, for example, one of our artists who was deaf, and not have that, not have their stipend be eaten up by access costs, which would then prohibit their production time and efforts. So, I mean, the beginning of this process started with conversations with other disabled people and our allies. The conversation started with an access rider for the team. It started with a conversation around the working conditions. How did we want to work together as a group, as a team? What support structures did we need in place to be able to do that? How fast or slow did we want to go? That's, it's not always possible to adjust everything, but we made a certain commitment to ourselves that we were going to produce this project in a way that was healthier than previous projects, that would take the time to actually have conversations at the beginning around access. And we found that the kinds of things that we needed in order to do a good job were the same things that our artists needed, whether they had a disability or not. And actually, in the course of the project, even though we had a mixed group of non-disabled and disabled artists, we had at least 2 people disclose to us that they actually had a disability, but they didn't label it as such. So, these things were so important to us. It was so important to creating an honest residency program and an exhibition that then also welcomed in a lot of people who felt moved, touched and spoken to by the artwork that was on display, which was multisensorial. Again, we talked with every artist, whether they had a disability or not. How can we interpret or mediate your work in various different ways? Not just one way, but in various ways, so that we can meet the needs of the different bodies that are going to be coming into this space.
Yes, for sure. I do agree. That's why big part of the project was including the different various communities in the production process, for that the audience the public feels important, feels being a kind of target, respected, weighted, desired. So of course we cannot interest or talk to each one. That's why to me a biennial is not like an exhibition. with an exhibition, you give quite precise direction. To me, for a biennial, it's a more, that's how I worked, more open invitation that each artist can interpret, and each proposal is an offer. And of course, the audience choose, people choose what they're interested in. That's why also we asked each artist to develop, to work in a large space. It's not one work by one work. Each time it's a kind of universe, of personal space. So of course it's different items, different subjects, different personalities. Also it was very open. I always say that I don't command artists. I don't order artists. And I know that more than ever, working now in an art school, you don't command artists. So you welcome them. So of course we work together, it's a conversation, it's about production, it's about money, it's about space, it's about relationships in the different works together also. But yes, it's a very open conversation. So yeah, to me it's a kind of, I look at Isabelle because maybe you can tell something about that, but it's like it's an offer with different various projects, artists, subjects, identities, differences, lives, experiences, and you take or you don't take. You encounter or you don't meet. That's life.
Are there any examples you could share with us about particular projects? You talked about this idea of involving the public in the production of the work. It would be, as we're here in Lyon, it would be really great to hear if there's something that you could tell us about that then we could see and think about actively as we go around the biennial. Or something you love, just, well, without, you know, no favorite child.
It's like children,
no
I love them all.
Child,
so.
But,
no, maybe one word about Mona Cara. I guess you saw her work yesterday. It's a very big and colored tapestry in the middle of Les Grands Locaux. She's a very, very young artist. She's not 30. And she's a sunny, solar personality. I don't know how to say. And she decided to work about the history of a cafe. She used to spend time, you know, when she was very young in the south of France, a cafe where people met, and it was the only chance they could meet because of the cafe, because it was very different person. So it's kind of mythology about this place. But you saw the iconography, it's very rich, it's... yeah, it's a kind of mythology, a personal mythology. And she works on different parts of the territories, weaving, so that's the right word, that's it, weaving in a special firm in nearby Clermont-Ferrand. Isabelle, help me because I'm not so... in Brioude. And then she discovered a special technique, which is lace work, lace. She didn't know, and she went in another place nearby the mountain, in le Massif Central, where work very famous people specialized in lace work. And there she worked with different communities and generations or people, but also working with very, very young people during weeks and weeks. So we have a lot of films to show us how they've been working together. And you know that sewing, making this kind of lace work, make people encounter, because that's silent, you have to focus on your activity, you have to work together, and you talk. And you share. And yeah, it was beautiful, beautiful experience. So it's a very long-term process, and it appears. So to me, it's one of the most beautiful work because it comes really from here. In fact, it's a very located, situated biennale, because most of the works could not exist without this relationship in a long-term process with the territory or with each of the places. I don't know if you have other examples, Isabelle, Bertolotti.
Maybe I can add something about Mona Cara concerning the work. So she did this work in different places in the countryside, but at the end, all these parts has been connected in a social center where people were without job, without family, and all together they sew these different parts together. And it was a long moment, and the main moment was at midday when they have they eat together. That was the main moment. And for me, it's the synthesis of what we want to have is the connection between people who don't know about art, we don't have job, we are sometimes have no more family, and it doesn't matter. It's all together in the work, and at the end, it's a work of art, and that's all, I think.
And maybe one word about a Turkish artist, Gözde İlkin. She comes from Istanbul, and she works with the others, that's all. And she worked during a residency program during some weeks in springtime with the people who have been working in les grands locaux, all the workers still alive who have left their job and a part of their history when this big industry closed some years ago. So she's been working with them. She doesn't speak French, but she always succeeds in making the others talking. I don't know how she does. She is a miracle, I can tell you. And all these men, almost men, workers, told her their history. So, of course, she saved the history. And she made them working all together, sewing also. So you can hear their voices in les grands locaux, but you can see also the big painting fabrics they made all together during many days, many weeks. So it was a very beautiful history. And it was important also for us that the people who've been working there, who are still alive, who are not that old, were a part of the process and of the projects.
Thank you. I think we have maybe a few minutes for questions or for people to ask about other projects. I know there are people here who work in ways that I'm interested in, for sure. But so just invite a moment for people to give reflections or to make questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. I had a comment about inclusivity. We've been trying to work for a long time with different centers. So we've done projects with the School for Autism, for the Deaf, which was became a long-term project with Tariq Atwi working with the deaf. It started in Sharjah with Al Amal School. And like you mentioned, there are many disabilities that are not visible as well. So we can't assume that people here don't share some disabilities that might not be visible or they may not want made visible. But in my experience working as a curator in Aichi in Japan and in Sydney, I know that the team are very strict on accessibility. And I think a lot of times people want to use spaces and curators want to use spaces because they're amazing, you can use this large building, but the institution has to put in place, sorry, it's not accessible, we're not allowed to use it. And I think there is a lot of work that is done behind the scenes that maybe doesn't get enough credit. And I think it's important to realize that institutions are working on this, and sometimes it's not made visible, the work that happens behind the scenes. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Aichi and Sydney for the work that they do as well.
Maybe I can just really quickly respond to that and say that I think this is the difficult thing, and what I really hope that everyone takes away from this discussion today is a sense of urgency and desire to exchange with each other about how you can address these things and how alliances can form amongst yourselves to share and swap ideas about how barriers can be dismantled. It's challenging because every country has its own legal framework, every country has its own funding framework, and that fundamentally affects how accessible or inaccessible the art scene is, what kind of buildings you use for the biennials, how much money you can spend on what. And of course, there's tokenism. There's a lot of, lip service being paid to the idea of inclusion without inclusive practices actually happening. So, that it's definitely a challenge, and I think the strength of the IBA lies in the fact that you're already all connected. You all are doing some work in some area. So, come together and exchange with each other and see what else can be done without having to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, thank you so much for your thoughts and reflections. Is it on? Closer? Okay, now better. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of bring back to what you were saying about who's including what, this kind of the central narrative. And I think in this edition of Bergen Assembly, my conveners are really challenging the term inclusion and the role that it has in Norwegian politics and society, and really saying shifting centers is what we want to do. We can't, we are upholding something sometimes when we talk about inclusion, and I think thinking about inclusion as a specific political term that has its histories, is connected to, the fall of Soviet Union and, including countries to an economic model, but this inclusion comes with you need to conform to certain shared values that we uphold as central values. So this is maybe just sort of something that's like spinning in our institution and a lot of other places I know, that we are thinking a lot with and trying to, and then I think, we've had these projects that I can really see that has, for moments at least, really shifted centers, like working with Paul Preciado and Victor Neumann on Parliament of Bodies in 2019. We had these moments where something shifted, right? And then it reverberates in our institution. And so I think it's also to allow these, really these questions and conversations to become the center, their own centers.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that, Ingrid, that point. There's this idea of making space, but we make space within our own terms, our terms. That with the first paper today, Didier also talked about, like, who gets to invite who and how does that operate? So how do we shift that? I guess for me, what I believe in my optimistic days is that biennials are these kind of opportunities to bring into direct relationship at a particular point of time different solidarities. And that can be productive, that can be affirmative, that can be difficult. It can also change how we operate organizationally. And sometimes those things are very visible, and sometimes they're invisible. And the invisible things, I believe they're conducted as well, just in a different way. So maybe that's a place to end. Maybe I just see if my conveners wanted to add any final words about their thoughts or wrap up at all.
Access is love, and we need that at the moment.
So about love, we'll meet tomorrow at the museum, where it's all about friendship and love in plural ways too.